Do you believe people can really change? Or do they just get better at hiding things?
I can still picture that fateful evening in vivid detail. The one where the fragile threads holding our family together unraveled in the most humiliating way imaginable during what was supposed to be a simple Thanksgiving gathering in the dining room of our aging suburban home in Ohio. A place steeped in memories from my grandparents' era with its peeling floral wallpaper and the lingering aroma of over-roasted turkey mingling with the tension that had been building for months beneath the surface of our strained interactions. My father, a retired factory worker whose authoritative presence had always dominated our household dynamics even after his health began to falter in recent years, sat at the head of the table like a weary monarch surveying his reluctant subjects, while my younger brother Mark, 20 years my junior and perpetually coasting on charm rather than effort, slouched across from me with his wife Lisa quietly pushing peas around her plate and our 7-year-old nephew Tommy distractedly stacking his blocks at the far end, oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around him as I, Camila, the 45-year-old accountant who had driven 2 hours from my modest apartment in Columbus just to maintain the illusion of unity, felt the weight of unspoken resentments pressing down harder with every forced bite of mashed potatoes. For years, I had been the invisible pillar supporting this crumbling structure, wiring money month after month to cover the utilities, the mortgage shortfalls, and even unexpected repairs like the roof that leaked during last summer's storms. All without fanfare or acknowledgement, because that's how our family operated, with Dad's pride dictating that gratitude was expressed through silence rather than words, and Mark's opportunism ensuring he reaped the benefits while offering little in return. As the meal wound down and the conversation lulled into that awkward post-feast haze where everyone avoids clearing the table, Dad suddenly cleared his throat with a gravelly rumble honed from decades of shouting over machinery, fixing his piercing gaze directly on me in a manner that signaled one of his infrequent but decisive proclamations, declaring in front of the entire assembled group that I could either start contributing in a more tangible way by moving into the cramped laundry room, like some unwelcome transient who had outstayed her welcome, or simply pack up and leave the family fold altogether, his words slicing through the air with the precision of a judgment long harbored, implying that my presence and efforts were more liability than asset, despite the reality that my financial interventions had kept the electricity flowing and the bank from foreclosing on more than one occasion. Mark, ever the echo of Dad's sentiments, responded with a smug smile that stretched across his face like a Cheshire cat's grin, adding his own layer of condescension by asking if I truly understood the message being delivered. His tone laced with that brotherly superiority he wielded whenever he sensed an opportunity to elevate himself at my expense, even though his own life was a patchwork of half-finished jobs and impulsive decisions that Lisa had to smooth over with her steady real estate commissions. The room fell into a stunned silence broken only by the faint clink of Lisa's fork against her plate as she shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between us in silent plea for intervention, while Tommy paused his play to look up with wide-eyed confusion. Sensing the shift in atmosphere, but too young to grasp the depth of the betrayal unfolding before him, and in that suspended moment, I felt a profound heat rising not from mere embarrassment, but from the dawning clarity that all my sacrifices, the late nights poring over spreadsheets at my desk job, the foregone vacations and personal indulgences to funnel resources their way, had been dismissed as insignificant in the grand narrative they had constructed around my role as the dependable but undervalued daughter. What followed was a cascade of emotions that propelled me from stunned inertia into decisive action, my mind racing through the litany of instances where I had stepped in quietly to avert crises. From covering Mark's gambling lapses in his early 20s to subsidizing Dad's medical copays after his retirement benefits fell short, all while building my own solitary life post-divorce in a city that offered anonymity but little warmth. And as the sting of their dismissal settled into resolve, I methodically pushed back my chair, the screech of wood on linoleum amplifying the finality of the gesture, retrieved my purse from the floor where it had rested unassumingly, and strode out the front door into the crisp November chill without uttering a single retort or backward glance, the slam of the car door echoing my departure as I navigated the familiar streets toward the highway. my grip on the steering wheel tightening with each mile that distanced me from the toxicity I had tolerated. For far too long. The ensuing days blurred into a routine of professional distractions and solitary evenings in my apartment, where the absence of familial obligations brought an unexpected relief tempered by flickers of doubt about whether I had overreacted. But that illusion shattered on the third afternoon when my phone buzzed with a terse message from Dad inquiring whether the utility payments were still being handled as usual, the casual phrasing belying the desperation it masked, as if the confrontation had been a mere blip and I would naturally resume my role without question or consequence, prompting a sharp, involuntary laugh from me as I contemplated the audacity of it all from the comfort of my office chair during a brief lull in client calls. Rather than firing off an immediate reply that might invite further manipulation, I allowed the message to simmer while channeling my burgeoning resolve into a subtle act of reclamation. Logging into the array of shared online accounts I had established over the years to facilitate my contributions, and with a few deliberate clicks, I canceled the premium streaming subscription that the entire household relied upon for their evening escapism, particularly Mark's obsessive football marathons. That consumed weekends and strained the bandwidth, envisioning the frustration that would ripple through their routines when the service abruptly terminated mid-episode. A petty yet pointed retaliation that carried the wit of irony since it disrupted their leisure without touching the essentials, marking the inaugural step in what promised to be a series of calculated responses to their ingratitude. The satisfaction of that small victory lingered as I powered down my computer and headed home, but it was abruptly interrupted by the insistent ring of my phone displaying Dad's number, his voice emerging hoarse and edged with uncharacteristic urgency when I hesitantly answered, launching into a rambling explanation about a mix-up with the bills that hinted at deeper disarray in their financial affairs, leaving me poised on the brink of either confrontation or further withdrawal. My heart pounding with the realization that this was merely the opening salvo in a larger unraveling yet to come. That urgent call from Dad echoed in my ears long after I hung up without committing to anything definitive, his voice cracking just enough to betray the cracks in his usual facade of unyielding control, prompting me to retreat into the familiar rhythm of my solitary apartment life, where the hum of the refrigerator and the distant city traffic provided a stark contrast to the chaotic underbelly of family obligations I had only begun to confront. And as the weekend unfolded with its gray skies mirroring my swirling thoughts, I found myself delving into the archives of our shared history through old emails and bank records stored on my laptop, unearthing patterns of dependency that stretched back over a decade to when I first started chipping in after my divorce left me rebuilding from scratch, while simultaneously propping up the household that had raised me with more expectations than emotional support. In those early days following the split from my ex-husband, whose wandering eyes and empty promises had shattered our 10-year marriage, I had channeled my pain into productivity at the accounting firm where promotions came steadily, but joy rarely followed, using my bonuses to quietly offset the shortfalls in the family budget, such as the time Mark's ill-fated attempt at launching a car detailing business fizzled out after 3 months, leaving him with debts that Dad co-signed out of paternal loyalty, forcing me to step in with transfers disguised as loans that were never repaid, all while Mom juggled her part-time shifts at the local clinic and Lisa navigated the ups and downs of her real estate commissions to keep their immediate needs met without drawing attention to the broader imbalances. Mark had always embodied the archetype of the favored son in our household, the one who breezed through high school on charisma alone before dropping out of community college to chase vague dreams of entrepreneurship that manifested more as excuses for extended adolescence. His life a series of detours like the bartending gig that ended in a hazy dismissal or the sales position that he quit after clashing with authority figures who demanded accountability, yet somehow he maintained that smug aura of entitlement, especially evident in how he leaned on Lisa's stability while contributing minimally to the family pot, a dynamic I observed more acutely now that distance allowed for clearer perspective. Particularly during my impromptu surveillance drive past the old house on that drizzly Saturday afternoon when I spotted him sprawled on the front steps nursing a beer around midday, his phone glued to his hand as if scrolling social media could substitute for the yard work piling up or the Oil change overdue on the family van. The deeper I dug into the financial trails, the more evident it became that my contributions had not only sustained the basics, but enabled indulgences like the annual 4th of July barbecue splurges or Mark's occasional weekend getaways that he posted about online with captions boasting of hard-earned relaxation, igniting a slow-burning humor in me at the absurdity of it all, imagining him as a king on a paper throne built from my invisible scaffolding, and that realization fueled a strategic pivot away from passive resentment toward active reclamation, starting with ignoring the barrage of follow-up texts from Dad that oscillated between gruff demands for updates on the utilities and veiled hints at reconciliation over a shared meal. By midweek, as the rain gave way to crisp autumn winds that whipped through Columbus streets during my lunch breaks, I had honed in on Mark's current employment at the auto parts distributor, where he had landed a supervisory role through sheer persistence rather than qualifications. Cross-referencing public reviews and employee forums that painted a picture of chronic lateness and delegated responsibilities, traits that had likely contributed to the warning he mentioned in a rambling voicemail. Left on my phone the previous evening, and with a wry internal chuckle at the poetic justice unfolding, I composed an anonymous email to his manager during a quiet moment at my desk, framing it as feedback from a concerned colleague who had noticed patterns of unreliability impacting team morale and store efficiency. Careful to include specific instances like the repeated delays in inventory checks without veering into outright accusation, ensuring the message carried the sting of truth wrapped in professional concern that would prompt scrutiny without revealing my hand. The act of hitting send brought a rush of vindication laced with that light vulgarity of satisfaction one feels when flipping the script on chronic takers, picturing Mark's face contorting in confusion as human resources pulled him aside for another chat, his smugness deflating like a punctured tire on the very vehicle he was supposed to oversee, and indeed, by Friday afternoon, a terse text from him arrived demanding to know if I had said something to his boss about his schedule, to which I replied with feigned innocence over a quick call, expressing surprise while suppressing laughter at his frantic denials and promises to shape up, the conversation ending on his note of reluctant appreciation for my advice. That masked the deeper unraveling I had set in motion. Yet that fleeting triumph dissolved into unease when the doorbell rang that same evening, revealing Mom on my doorstep with her coat clutched tightly against the chill and a container of homemade chicken noodle soup in hand, her eyes shadowed by fatigue that spoke volumes about the toll the household discord was taking on her resilient frame, and without preamble, she stepped inside, settling at my kitchen table where she poured out a torrent of worries about Dad's rising blood pressure, exacerbated by the recent disruptions and the mounting bills that threatened their sense of security, her voice softening as she alluded to an old family entanglement involving a lone dad had secured against the house during Mark's turbulent early adulthood. Details she sketched vaguely as a cautionary tale of risks tied to his impulsive choices that had rippled outward to affect us all, hinting at unresolved debts that my interventions had inadvertently papered over for years. As she spoke, her hands gesturing animatedly over the steaming bowl she insisted I try, I felt the uncertainty creep back in, questioning whether my revenges were merely scratching the surface of a more profound betrayal, or if they risked toppling the fragile equilibrium that still bound us. Her plea for understanding hanging heavy in the air until my phone vibrated with an incoming message from an unfamiliar number, displaying a grainy scan of what appeared to be an outdated bank statement marked with cryptic annotations in handwriting I recognized as Mark's, the implications of which sent a shiver down my spine as Mom leaned in to see, her expression shifting from concern to outright alarm, leaving me suspended in a moment of revelation that promised to upend everything I thought I knew about our tangled loyalties. Mom's alarmed reaction to that scanned bank statement lingered in the air of my kitchen like a fog that refused to lift even after she gathered her things and left with promises to follow up on the details she had only hinted at during her emotional outpouring, leaving me alone with the glowing screen of my phone and a mind racing through the implications of those cryptic notes scribbled in Mark's unmistakable scrawl, which seemed to reference deferrals and extensions on some long-forgotten obligation that tied our family's financial stability to risks I had never been fully briefed on, and as the night deepened into a restless vigil punctuated by cups of chamomile tea that did little to soothe the churning doubts, I grappled with the duality of my emerging role as both avenger and reluctant detective in a saga that felt increasingly like a poorly scripted drama from one of those late-night Family Feud shows that aired on cable channels catering to middle-aged viewers seeking catharsis in others' misfortunes. The following days brought a deluge of subdued communications from home, with Lisa sending tentative texts about smoothing things over and Dad's sporadic voicemails grumbling about practicalities like the streaming blackout without delving into the emotional undercurrents. But the unavoidable pull of familial ties drew me back into the fray when an invitation arrived for our cousin Emily's 40th birthday barbecue at a sprawling park on the outskirts of town, an event steeped in the traditions of our extended clan where picnic tables groaned under potluck spreads and laughter masked the generational grudges simmering just below the surface, prompting me to attend not with open arms, but armed with a resolve to observe and subtly probe the fractures I had only recently begun to exploit. Arriving under a sky dotted with lazy clouds that promised a temperate afternoon ideal for such gatherings, I navigated the clusters of relatives exchanging hugs and small talk about jobs and grandkids, the scent of charcoal-grilled burgers wafting through the air as children like Tommy darted between legs in games of tag, and soon enough, I spotted the core group clustered near the grill where Dad manned the tongs with his characteristic focus, his posture slightly hunched in a way that betrayed the toll of recent stresses, while Mark hovered nearby bantering with uncles about sports scores and Lisa chatted with aunts over slices of watermelon, her expression a careful neutral that hinted at brewing tensions in their marriage. Seizing a moment when Mark wandered off to refill his drink from the cooler, I sidled up to him under the pretense of casual catch-up, inquiring lightly about his work adjustments with a tone that feigned sisterly concern while watching for tells in his evasive replies, and that's when my gaze caught the faint reddish mark peeking above the collar of his polo shirt, a telltale remnant of some clandestine encounter that clashed glaringly with the family man image he projected so effortlessly, igniting a spark of opportunistic humor in me at the sheer irony of his moral lapses mirroring the financial ones I had uncovered, a vulgar undercurrent of schadenfreude bubbling up as I imagined the domestic fallout if Lisa connected the dots. As the afternoon progressed into group activities like the obligatory horseshoe toss and a round of storytelling around the dessert table laden with Emily's homemade pies, I waited for the perfect interlude during a toast led by our cousin, raising my plastic cup of lemonade with a wry observation about how some folks juggled more balls than they could keep in the air without dropping a few unexpectedly, my words laced with just enough ambiguity to pierce Mark's facade without alerting the others outright, his face draining of color as he met my eyes briefly, the seed of exposure planted with witty precision that left him fidgeting through the remainder of the event while Lisa shot him puzzled glances, the subtle revenge unfolding like a slow drip poison that satisfied my sense of justice without descending into outright confrontation. The gratification of that maneuver ebbed quickly, however, when Dad drew me aside to a quieter bench overlooking the playground swings where Tommy now swung lazily, his voice dropping to a confidential timbre as he confessed the utility disruptions had escalated into a formal shut-off warning that compounded his mounting anxieties, then layering on the bombshell of preliminary medical findings from a recent checkup revealing a suspicious shadow on his lung scan that required further tests, framing it as a wake-up call for the family to pull together amid uncertainties that hit me with an unwelcome wave of empathy clashing against my hardened resolve, because while part of me reveled in the discomfort my actions had wrought, another recoiled at the possibility that I was amplifying stresses on a man whose vulnerabilities I had long overlooked in favor of resenting his domineering ways, disagreeing inwardly with my own unyielding stance that prioritized payback over potential peril, especially as he appealed to my expertise in numbers to help navigate the impending bills without specifying the deeper entanglements Mom had alluded to. Driving back to Columbus as the sun dipped low casting elongated shadows across the highway, I wrestled with the ethical tangle of it all, the health revelation introducing a dilemma that blurred the lines between deserved comeuppance and inadvertent cruelty, wondering if Dad's disclosure was genuine vulnerability or a calculated ploy to manipulate my return to the fold, the ambiguity gnawing at me through a dinner of reheated leftovers that tasted like ash in light of the day's revelations. The tension crystallized 2 evenings later when an unassuming package arrived at my door, its plain brown wrapping and return address from a local post office yielding to reveal a bundle of aged mortgage documents in Dad's trembling script accompanying them. Pages yellowed with time and annotated with dates and figures that pointed to extensions granted during Mark's early 20s when a series of poor choices had nearly jeopardized the home's equity, the notation suggesting not just oversight but active concealment of liabilities that my past contributions had masked, and as I spread them across my dining table under the harsh glow of a single lamp, the patterns coalesced into evidence of a far more insidious financial undercurrent, one that implicated the entire family in a web of deferrals and half-truths poised to ensnare me further if I didn't tread carefully. My pulse quickening with the foreboding sense that this discovery was merely the gateway to confrontations that would test the limits of my vengeful ingenuity. Those mortgage documents sprawled across my table became an obsessive focal point over the ensuing week, their faded lines and marginal scribbles weaving a narrative of deferred reckonings that illuminated how Mark's youthful indiscretions had entangled the family in a cycle of financial tightropes I had unwittingly helped balance through my steady infusions of cash, prompting me to sift through them methodically each evening after work while the city outside my window buzzed with oblivious commuters. The weight of discovery pressing me to contemplate not just the betrayals, but the broader vulnerabilities they exposed in a household where Dad's stubborn independence clashed with the realities of aging and Mark's perpetual boyish escapades that Lisa increasingly shouldered alone. Communications from home intensified in the interim, with Mom's calls blending maternal pleas for unity against Dad's health worries and Lisa's separate messages hinting at marital friction that my barbecue quip had exacerbated without intending to torpedo their stability entirely, culminating in a collective push for a family summit to address the escalating disarray, which I agreed to on neutral ground but steered toward practicalities by proposing we audit the vacation fund earmarked for their long-awaited Florida getaway, a pot I had seeded generously over the years from my savings to foster some semblance of shared joy amid the grind, envisioning the discussion as an opportunity to assert boundaries while gauging their desperation firsthand. The meeting convened that overcast Sunday in the living room of the old house, where dust motes danced in the slanted light filtering through half-drawn curtains and the air carried the faint mustiness of unresolved tensions. With Dad ensconced in his worn armchair nursing a mug of black coffee that he sipped more for show than sustenance, Mark pacing the threadbare carpet with restless energy that betrayed his unease. Lisa perched on the sofa edge cradling Tommy, who doodled absent-mindedly on a notepad, and Mom flitting between the kitchen and us with trays of sandwiches as if normalcy could be served on rye bread, allowing me to take the lead by unfolding my laptop on the coffee table and launching into a presentation of the fund's ledger. Rows of entries meticulously tracked to highlight contributions versus expenditures, including the extras I had slipped in during lean months to keep the dream alive without fanfare. As Dad leaned forward with furrowed brows feigning incomprehension over the balances and Mark interjected defensively about necessary adjustments for unforeseen costs like his recent car tune-up, I revealed the preemptive maneuver I had executed the night prior, having quietly transferred the entire sum into a segregated account under my sole control framed as a protective measure against further mismanagement. The witty sting of the revelation landing when Mark lunged for his phone to check the joint app only to find it depleted, his outburst of incredulity mingling with Dad's sputtering protests in a comedic tableau that had me suppressing a grin at the reversal where their reliance boomeranged back with elegant precision, turning what was meant as a family escape into a mirror reflecting their fiscal follies. Yet the humor soured swiftly as Tommy's lower lip quivered upon hearing the beach trip was indefinitely postponed. His innocent question about whether that meant no sandcastles this year piercing the room's charged atmosphere and striking at my conscience with unanticipated force. Because in pursuing this clever payback, I had overlooked how the ripples extended to the untainted corners of our lives, making me inwardly recoil at the selfishness of my strategy that now casts shadows over a child's uncomplicated excitement. Disagreeing vehemently with the cold calculus that prioritized adult vendettas over such collateral innocence, and prompting a momentary hesitation where I offered to earmark a portion for his summer camp as a conciliatory gesture. Though the damage lingered in Lisa's grateful yet guarded nod and Mom's sigh of weary relief. The session devolved into fragmented arguments thereafter, with Dad retreating into silence about his medical limbo and Mark storming off to the garage muttering about fairness, leaving Mom to draw me into the kitchen under the guise of clearing plates, where she finally unburdened the fuller context of that ancient loan. Confessing in hushed tones that it originated from Mark's gambling spiral during his college dropout phase, when high-stakes poker nights at off-campus dens had spiraled into debts that Dad co-signed to shield him from consequences, only for the repayments to falter repeatedly and force a chain of extensions that my later inputs had sustained without my knowledge, her eyes welling as she described the ongoing specter of foreclosure that loomed larger now with Dad's health adding urgency. Appealing to my professional acumen to intervene with the bank on terms that could salvage their nest egg. Standing there amid the clatter of dishes and the steam from the sink, I navigated the surge of conflicting impulses, the ethical dilemma crystallizing as sympathy for Mom's plight warred with the imperative to dismantle the patterns of exploitation that had defined my role for so long, because extending aid now risked perpetuating the very dependencies I sought to escape. Yet withholding it entirely might precipitate a collapse that entangled innocents like Tommy in hardships they deserved no part of, leaving me to promise consideration without commitment as I gathered my things and departed into the fading daylight, the drive back to Columbus fraught with introspection on the fragility of family fortifications built on half-truths. The internal turmoil peaked the very next evening when a thunderous knock echoed through my apartment hallway, revealing Mark on the threshold, disheveled and wild-eyed, shoving past me into the living room with demands for the funds restitution laced with threats of escalation, his agitation peaking as he produced a small flash drive from his pocket and thrust it toward me with trembling hands, insisting it contained irrefutable evidence of entanglements from our past that bound us all in ways I could scarcely imagine. The partial truths it hinted at dangling like a precipice from which our fragile equilibrium teetered on the edge of total disclosure. Mark's flash drive felt like a live wire in my hand after he thrust it at me and stormed out into the hallway, his footsteps fading down the stairs with a finality that left my apartment echoing in the sudden quiet, compelling me to insert it into my computer immediately despite the late hour, the screen illuminating my face with files that unfolded like chapters in a confessional diary spanning 15 years, revealing emails where Dad had orchestrated subtle pressures through Mom to coax my financial support during his post-retirement slumps, while Mark diverted portions of household funds toward his hidden vices, including that gambling vortex from his early 20s that had siphoned thousands into online bets masked as business expenses, all of which my post-divorce windfall had inadvertently replenished without a whisper of transparency, the vulgar irony hitting me hard as I scrolled through the threads that portrayed me not as a daughter, but as an unwitting ATM in there. Carefully curated survival strategy. The major truths emerged piecemeal in those digital shadows, confirming the utility reliance as a deliberate construct built on my predictability, with Mark's affair notes buried in subfolders adding layers of hypocrisy to his moral posturing. And by dawn's first light filtering through my blinds, the pieces aligned into a mosaic of manipulation that both validated my revenges and stirred a reluctant pity for the desperation driving their deceptions, leaving me to brew coffee strong enough to fortify against the confrontation I knew was inevitable as calls from Lisa about marital counseling sessions and Mom's updates on Dad's specialist appointment piled up in my voicemail. The family converged on my apartment that Saturday afternoon uninvited, but with the momentum of shared crisis, piling through the door in a wave of accusations and entreaties that filled the living room with the chaotic energy of a courtroom drama minus the gavel. Dad leading with his cane tapping authoritatively on the floorboards as he demanded restitution for the vacation fund to cover emerging medical outlays, Mark trailing behind with hollow-eyed pleas for discretion on his personal failings to preserve what remained of his union with Lisa, who stood arms crossed observing the spectacle with a mix of resentment and curiosity, and Tommy weaving through legs clutching a toy truck as if it could shield him from the adult tempests. Mom hovering at the periphery wringing her hands in a silent appeal for mediation that I provided by gesturing them toward the sofa and pulling up the financial trail on my television via a quick connection from the drive, the display casting stark grids of transactions that expose the siphons and deferrals without assigning blame overtly, the witty core of my final revenge crystallizing as I narrated the overview in measured tones, highlighting how I had already engaged a financial advisor to restructure the debts into a family trust demanding equitable contributions from each adult member, forcing Mark towards supplemental employment and Dad to curtail non-essentials, like his weekly diner outings, transforming their passive dependence into a collaborative burden that pricked their egos with the precision of a well-aimed dart. The room erupted in a cacophony of reactions thereafter, Dad's gruff mutterings evolving into a reluctant acknowledgement of the utility catch-up I had anonymously arranged overnight to avert immediate shut-off while preserving my distance. Mark slinking toward the door as Lisa cornered him with questions ignited by the affair hints in the files I had selectively shared with her beforehand, her voice rising in a blend of hurt and resolve that echoed the very manipulations they had inflicted on me. And even Tommy pausing his play to ask why everyone sounded so mad, his innocence amplifying the discomfort until Mom steered him to the kitchen for juice, allowing the dust to settle into a fragile truce where partial admissions surfaced like bubbles in a stirred pot, Dad conceding the lung shadow's gravity was real, but perhaps amplified in retellings to hasten my involvement. A confession laced with the humor of his old dramatic flair that drew a wry chuckle from me despite the undercurrent of betrayal. As the others filtered out into the hallway one by one, Lisa pausing to squeeze my arm in silent solidarity and Mark avoiding my gaze entirely. Mom lingered on the balcony overlooking the parking lot where streetlights flickered to life against the encroaching dusk, her presence a bridge to the uncharted territories of reconciliation as she elaborated on the fears that had fueled their secrecy. Admitting the gambling debt's shadow still loomed in potential liens that the trust might mitigate, but never erase, her words weaving a tapestry of regret that humanized the antagonists in my narrative without absolving them fully. In those closing moments, as the city hummed below with lives unburdened by our particular brand of dysfunction, I confronted the hollowness of my victories. The clever exposures and restructurings granting a surface satisfaction laced with the light vulgarity of seeing them squirm yet underscoring the isolation that came from severing ties so deeply ingrained. Emotions churning as I pondered whether forgiveness could bridge the chasms without inviting fresh exploitations, or if the ambiguities of their motives, genuine frailty versus calculated ploys, warranted a permanent vigilance that might preserve my autonomy at the cost of familial fragments worth reclaiming, the unanswered questions lingering like echoes in the empty apartment, prompting a reflective gaze into the night where closure remained as elusive as the stars obscured by urban glow.